Some leaders scramble at the first sign of a storm, others chart a course and let the weather pass overhead. Just the other day, Prime Minister Mark Carney gave a fantastic interview discussing Canada's trade strategy. Today we're going to think about how Canada's whole direction is quietly rewriting the rules of North American power and why stability can be a form of leverage. In this video, we're going to explore three central ideas: why Canada's economic calm is not a coincidence, how trade with China and the US reflects a new global playbook, and what this balancing act tells us about the sovereignty in a volatile world. Before we get into it, I'd love to hear your views as usual. If a country depends on one partner for most of its prosperity, do you see that as more of a strength or vulnerability? We can make arguments that it produces stability, risk, or leverage, but what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments and we'll return to this in the end. Imagine a nation standing in the crosswinds of global tension, its neighbor to the south lurching through political upheaval, its biggest trading partners rethinking old alliances. For Canada, this isn't just the background noise of international affairs, rather is the defining soundtrack of the era. Each headline from Washington, every diplomatic reshuffle in Europe or Asia ripples through Ottawa like the aftershocks of a distant earthquake. The stakes aren't theoretical. Canada's fortunes are tied by geography, history, and economics to forces far beyond its control. This is the context in which every press conference takes on new gravity. When Prime Minister Carney faces questions about delays in talks with the US president, the room tightens, waiting for a sign of anxiety or impatience. But Carney doesn't blink. He answers with a kind of factual composure, turning to numbers as both shield and signal. 85% of Canadian exports to the United States are tariff-free. The lowest average tariff on any major economy. Not quite the posture of a country under siege, but of one holding a defense line. Yet beneath these headlines, a more complex choreography is underway. Economic calm is rarely an accident. Each percentage point of tariff-free trade represents months of quiet negotiation, technical bargaining, and hard-won compromise. Behind Carney, of course, there is a team of advisors and diplomats who move through lists of irritants: steel, aluminium, forest products, autos, and the ever-looming reviews of trade deals that could disrupt everything with a single clause. This is a constant recalibration, like a pilot trimming the sails in unpredictable wind. But the real message is in what is not said. Canada is not waiting for America's approval, nor is it panicking over Trump's every tweet. Instead, there is a sense of quiet preparedness. While headlines speculate about stalled conversations, a senior team is already in Washington preparing for the next round of negotiations with a kind of deliberate patience that rarely makes the evening news. The country is, in Carney's own words, not desperate for Trump's America. In an era of performative outrage, there is a certain elegance in strategic silence. This is not the silence of indecision, but of restraint, a prime minister laying the groundwork for the future, not just reacting to the present. It's the discipline of a nation refusing to be pulled off course by the turbulence around it, calmly steering through the storm instead. If you want to support this kind of analysis, there's a Ko-fi link below. Every contribution helps, and if you've ever found these topics a little hard to follow, not for lack of intelligence, but because the framing is always opaque, I'm writing something for you. It's a book on thinking clearly in a world drowning in noise. If that sounds like something you'd like to read, there's a waiting list sign-up link in the description. But what happens when a country decides not to put all of its eggs in one basket? For Canada, the answer is neither retreat nor reckless adventurism. It's about quietly building options that stretch far beyond the headlines. Here, Canada's policy is not simply about hedging risk. It's about creating alternatives, cultivating leverage, and asserting a kind of gentle independence on the world stage. Diversification is a buzzword in economics, a term often invoked and rarely defined. But for Canada, it's become something more existential, a question of identity and not just strategy. The Carney approach is a deliberate broadening of the horizon, building new bridges to Europe, where established rules and predictable partners offer a counterweight to volatility, deepening links in Asia, where emerging markets and old powers create a dynamic and unpredictable mosaic, and most controversially, navigating the opaque waters of trade with China. For Canada, China is both an opportunity and a puzzle. Is the country's second largest trading partner, a source of real gains in agriculture, fisheries, and manufactured exports, but their relationship is lined with caution tape, human rights disputes, security concerns, a long memory of diplomatic cold fronts, and alliances that shift as quickly as the global winds. It's not an easy partnership, and it's certainly not built on trust. Carney doesn't romanticize this. He calls the relationship for what it is, a blend of differences and areas for cooperation. Where other leaders might grandstand or retreat, Canada moves deliberately, negotiating new agricultural deals, advancing fisheries exports, and above all, keeping its options open. Each step is calculated, neither naive nor reckless, aimed at maximizing benefit without surrendering principle. This is not about ignoring the perils of the New World Order. In Carney's view, to engage with the world as it is, rather than as we wish for it to be, is a mark of sovereignty, not a concession to pressure. It's a subtle but crucial distinction here. Strategic engagement rather than dependence, participation without subordination to other nations. And here's the quiet principle behind this strategy. No single country, no matter how powerful, can hold Canada hostage. To diversify is not simply to survive, it's to insist on agency, to ensure that the nation's fate is never entirely in another's hands. If you're enjoying this, I'd love it if you subscribe. The House of L is a community of thoughtful, curious people, and you're very welcome here. The 2020s have, of course, brought a new choreography to global politics, a dance that is at once more fluid and more perilous than anything the post-war world has seen. Unlikely alliances form and dissolve in real time, economic rivalries sharpen into diplomatic standoffs that can, in a heartbeat, ripple into sanctions, tariffs, or even military brinkmanship. The recent summit of President Xi, President Kim, and President Putin did more than raise diplomatic eyebrows. It signaled a profound recalibration of global risk, a reminder that the patterns of the past no longer hold. In this shifting landscape, Carney is remarkably forthright. When pressed on whether the world has become more dangerous, he doesn't evade this. He says, yes, the world is a riskier place than it was in the 1990s or the early 2000s. It's not just that power balances are shifting, it's more that the foundations themselves are less stable. The alliances that once shaped a predictable order now breed new forms of uncertainty, with old partners hesitating and new blocs emerging, often with very little warning. Yet within this complexity, Carney draws a careful and visible line. There are boundaries to Canada's engagement, and not all doors are open. Russia's sanction for its ongoing war in Ukraine remains firmly out of bounds. No commercial relationship, no diplomatic overtures. North Korea similarly sits outside any credible pathways to partnership. Its regime is too unpredictable, and the differences appear too stark for Canada. These are not necessarily relationships to be salvaged. China and India, by contrast, occupy a more complicated space. They are at once adversaries and essential partners, challenging, yes, but indispensable to Canada's long-term interests. Here, the model is pragmatic and not ideological. Commercial relationships are cultivated where consistent with Canada's values and interests. The approach is not to gloss over differences, but to acknowledge them openly and still pursue cooperation where it serves a broader Canadian good. This is a far cry from the era when Western countries drew bright red lines, when alliances were binary and diplomacy was all or nothing. The new playbook seems more conditional, a lot more nuanced. Instead of severing ties, Canada manages them, weighing every engagement through a lens of benefit, risk, and principle. The details are often technical and even mundane. Take Canadian canola exports as an example. At every new regulatory hurdle, Ottawa convenes the provinces, dispatches trade ministers, and when the stakes are high, deploys the Prime Minister himself. These are not the actions of a government seeking isolation. Rather, they reflect a conviction that sovereignty is best protected by nurturing a portfolio of options, never allowing one relationship to become the sole pillar of national prosperity. This is the diplomatic tightrope. It demands restraint and readiness, a willingness to walk the narrow path between engagement and detachment. Yet in a world where the old certainties have kind of frayed, it may be the only way to retain genuine agency and to secure a measure of stability, however provisional, amidst the churn of global realignment. For years, Canada's federal spending was basically outpacing how fast the economy was actually growing. Now, you'd think the obvious move would be to start slashing programs left and right, tighten the purse strings, and just brace yourself for the inevitable pain, right? But Carney's approach is actually more thoughtful than that. Instead of going full austerity mode, he's talking about efficiency. Basically, cut the waste, but don't cut the muscle. Here's the thing though, every dollar they free up doesn't just disappear. It gets redirected into areas that actually have a multiplying effect on the economy. Housing, infrastructure, clean energy, innovation. These aren't just expenses you have to swallow. They're investments that pay dividends down the road. And there's also something Carney says that really cuts to the heart of it. This is Canadians' money. It's not the government's money, he says. That's the mindset shift right there. So the real challenge isn't to just stop spending altogether. It is to just spend smarter. get private investment moving, fuel long-term growth, and make sure that the economy doesn't become too fragile to handle whatever comes next. It's a model that basically asks Canadians to trust the process, accept some rebalancing now so that we can build something more stable for the long haul. And honestly, so far, it seems to be working. Services are still solid, families aren't getting squeezed, and Canada's managed to weather economic storms that have really hammered other countries. For a deep dive into the present economic reality of Canada, check out this video that I'm linking here. The work is ongoing, of course. They're constantly debating new efficiencies, mapping out new investments. There's no pretense that they figured it all out, just the sense that they're fine-tuning the system rather than completely overhauling it. It's steady, maybe not flashy, but quietly getting the job done, which is pretty much all we can hope for. There is an old idea that nations, like ships, are either anchored in safe harbor or cast adrift on open water. But perhaps the real art of leadership lies in steering between those poles, never fully secure, never fully exposed, always adjusting to the current. So let's revisit our earlier question. If a country depends on one partner for most of its prosperity, is that strength, vulnerability, or leverage? In Canada's case, the answer is all three and none at once. Stability provides strength, but only if it's defended. Reliance breeds vulnerability, but only if options are neglected. Leverage emerges not from bravado, but from the patient cultivation of alternatives. This lesson is not just for Canada as well. In a world where the tides of trade and geopolitics are always shifting, the nations that thrive will be those that learn to move calmly, never too fast, never too slow, and never with all their weight in a single plane. For more on how other countries are navigating these same dilemmas, watch my videos on Canada's trade with the EU and on the Nordic balancing acts in Sweden and Norway. As always, thank you for watching, and may your course be steady wherever you sail next.